everyone.
For 35 years, he avoided love, not because he couldn't have it, but because somewhere along the way, he decided it wasn't worth the cost. He built an empire people studied in business schools, a fortune that stretched beyond imagination, the kind of wealth that could buy entire city blocks without a second thought. Yet every single night, without exception, he sat alone at a long dining table meant for 12, eating in silence. The world called him disciplined, calculated, untouchable. But that wasn't the full story, because everything he built, every deal, every acquisition, every sleepless night, it all traced back to one quiet belief he never said out loud, that people leave, that they always do. Until one evening in a place so ordinary it barely deserved a second glance. Everything changed. It happened fast. Too fast for someone like him. A coffee cup slipped from her hand, hitting the floor in a sharp, echoing crack. Heads turned, conversations paused, and for a brief second, their eyes met. He saw her once, and within seconds, made a decision that would shock everyone who knew him. But what looked like the beginning of something extraordinary would soon raise a question no one could ignore. Was this love or something far more dangerous? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. A 62-year-old billionaire and a 22-year-old waitress. On paper, it didn't just sound unlikely. It sounded impossible. Within weeks, whispers began to spread. At first, quietly among employees and acquaintances, then louder, spilling into media headlines and late-night discussions. People asked the same questions over and over again, trying to make sense of something that refused to fit into a neat explanation. Why her? What did she know? And what really happened behind closed doors? Because months after they met, something shifted, something no one outside their world could fully explain. And that's where the story truly begins. He wasn't born into wealth. In fact, his early life looked nothing like the polished image people saw decades later. He grew up in a small, fading neighborhood where opportunities were limited and expectations were even smaller. His parents worked constantly, yet it was never enough to escape the quiet pressure of survival. And then, just as he began to understand what stability meant, he lost them both within a short span of time. It wasn't dramatic. There was no grand moment, no defining speech, just silence, just absence, and a young man learning very quickly that the world does not pause for grief. That experience didn't break him, it reshaped him. He stopped expecting comfort, stopped relying on anyone, and instead he turned to something far more predictable. Numbers, systems, strategy. In his world, effort produced results, risk could be calculated, outcomes could be controlled, and over time, that mindset turned into something powerful. He built his first company with almost nothing, reinvesting every dollar, working longer hours than anyone around him. One success turned into another, then another, and before long, he wasn't just successful, he was dominant. But as his empire grew, something else quietly faded, his ability to connect. Relationships became transactional, conversations became strategic, and slowly, without realizing it, he built walls so high, no one could reach him. People admired him. They respected him, but they didn't know him. And the truth was, he preferred it that way. Or at least that's what he told himself. Because behind that control, behind that discipline, was something unresolved. Something he never allowed himself to confront. Her story was different. Not easier, just different. She lived in a small apartment that barely held together under the weight of unpaid bills and quiet stress. Every day was a balance between classes, late-night studying, and long shifts at the diner. She wasn't chasing luxury. She wasn't dreaming about wealth. She just wanted a way forward, a way out of the constant pressure that followed her everywhere she went. She was observant, more than most people realized. She noticed details others ignored, the way people spoke when they were nervous, the way silence filled a room when something felt off, and more importantly, she understood people. Not in a calculated way, but in a genuine, instinctive way that made others feel seen. But she wasn't looking for love. She didn't have the time, the energy, or the space for it. Her life was focused on survival, on making it through each week without everything falling apart. Still, there was something about her, something subtle but undeniable, that would catch his attention instantly. It was a rainy evening when he walked into the diner, with a kind of rain that blurred streetlights and made everything feel distant. He didn't belong there. That much was obvious. His presence carried weight, even in a simple room filled with ordinary conversations. People noticed, even if they couldn't explain why. And then she approached his table. No hesitation, no recognition, no shift in behavior. She spoke to him the same way she spoke to everyone else. Simple, direct, human. For the first time in decades, someone didn't see his money. They didn't adjust their tone. They didn't try to impress him. They didn't treat him like a symbol. And something about that moment stayed with him. He returned the next day, and the day after that. At first, their conversations were brief, routine, but slowly, almost without either of them realizing it, they began to stretch. A question turned into a discussion turned into something deeper. Staff began to notice. Regular customers whispered, because it wasn't just that he kept coming back. It was how he looked at her, focused, intent, like someone trying to understand something they had been missing for a very long time. Then one night, he did something no one expected. He asked her out, direct, unfiltered, no build-up, no hesitation, and for a moment, everything stopped. To him, it was certainty. To everyone else, it didn't make sense. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. Private dinners replaced casual conversations. Quiet moments turned into something more complex. He introduced her to a life she had never imagined. A world of luxury, influence, and power that moved faster than anything she had known before. But alongside that, there was discomfort. Not obvious at first, but present. Her friends warned her. They questioned his intentions. They questioned hers. And as the story began to spread, so did the attention. Strangers formed opinions without knowing anything real about what was happening. Some believed it was strategic. Others believed it was temporary. Very few believed it was genuine. And in the middle of all that noise, she started to question things herself. Not him, but the situation, the speed, the intensity. Because while he moved with certainty, she was still trying to understand what this meant for her life. And then, just weeks later, he made a move that shocked even his closest advisors. He proposed. There was no long buildup, no carefully planned timeline. Just a decision made with the same confidence he applied to everything else in his life. The reaction was immediate. Media coverage exploded. Analysts speculated. Friends distanced themselves. Lawyers raised concerns. People weren't asking if it would last. They were asking what she really wanted, because from the outside, it looked uneven, imbalanced, too fast to be real. But what people couldn't see, what no one could fully understand, was what was happening behind closed doors. Subtle shifts, quiet moments, conversations that didn't always end with agreement, because as much as he believed in control, this was something different, something he couldn't predict. And that uncertainty started to change him. At first it was small, a need for reassurance, a question asked more than once, a pause where there used to be certainty. And then it grew. He began to depend on her presence in a way he didn't expect, not for strategy, not for business, but for something far more personal, something he had avoided for decades, and she felt it. The weight of that expectation, the shift from admiration to reliance. What started as something genuine, something simple, began to evolve into something more complex. Because she did care. That part was real. She saw beyond the wealth, beyond the reputation. She saw the man who built everything and the cost that came with it. But at the same time, she began to feel the pressure of being the one person he couldn't afford to lose. And that changed everything. This wasn't a perfect story. It wasn't simple. It was human. It was fragile. and it was shifting in ways neither of them fully understood. So in the end, there was no dramatic collapse, no single moment that defined everything, just a quiet transformation, the kind that happens slowly, over time. They didn't become what people expected. They didn't follow the narrative the world tried to impose on them. Instead, they found something in between, something imperfect, but real in its own way. Because it was never about money. It was never about status. It was about two people trying to fill something missing in their lives. And whether they succeeded or simply learned to live with that emptiness is something only they truly know. So what do you think? Was this real love or something else entirely? Would you trust a relationship like this? And if you think this story is unusual, wait until you hear about the woman who disappeared and came back 10 years later.